Hey, Hunters, Halozu here, back with more One D&D Playtest 7 stuff. This time we're mostly going to cover the Sorcerer and Wizard. I've decided I'm going to do Warlock in another video because there's a few things to talk about there. So, first off, I do want to give an addendum to what I said about Barbarian. Upon further reflection, I do actually think that a good alternative to getting Path of the World Tree right now, mostly with how the World Tree feels like it needs a lot more work, where I feel like there's some more refinement that can be done, perhaps adding upgrades to these three features that happen around level 14 or something, maybe, but basically just have some modifications done, save it for another book, and have a oh lord, that's a lovely thing to see pop up. But instead of this one, have a returning subclass. And I originally said I really want Storm Herald, but thinking about it now, I think Wild Magic needs it more. Probably the only Tasha's subclass I would actually prefer seeing to Xanathar's ones. Mostly because of just how, like, rough that one can be. Especially with how just bad it is later on, where I know a friend of mine was like, yeah, he was playing a Wild Magic Barbarian, but as they got to later and later levels, he just had to stop playing it because it was so bad. Mostly because of how the effects don't scale in damage. It's not even like, oh, at 11th level they get an extra dice. It's just... And then the option on a 1 isn't repeatable, so it's like, you roll in that 1, you just feel bad. And I'm actually going to double check something. I should have double checked this before, but I'm pretty sure sorcerers used to start with 5 cantrips, so let me pause real quick before we get to the actual stuff I was going to talk about. Okay, I had derped, and it was always 4. I think I was actually remembering from 5.5 that they have 5, but they always had 4. Also, once again, I have to bring this up. Please stop calling spells known prepared spells, wizards. Change this back. Or at least the terminology back. Thank you very much. Let this everyone prepares spells BS and lie die in a hole. But anyway, on to what's actually going on with Sorcerer. A big change is that... So first off, Arcane List is gone. This does mean they've lost a lot of utility, but you weren't really going for it anyway. So it's kind of... it's what one might call a net zero change, where it doesn't really matter too much in the grand scheme of things, but... basically, you have 2 new options, Sorcerer's Burst and Arcane Eruption, which returned from the previous playtest. The others don't. So, Sorcerer's Vitality is just gone. Sorcery Incarnate is reworked, which, no surprises there. And then Sorcerer's Burst and Arcane Eruption have been changed to just be on the spell list. Which also, while innate sorcery, is entirely different. Which, not technically bad, but I will mention one thing where that kind of hurts it. Font of Magic no longer uses the bonus action to convert spell slots into sorcery points. Not bad. Definitely useful change to make it where it's like, oh yeah, you get more sorcery points if you really need to power up your spell. Meta Magic is 2 options at level 2, and then 2 more at 10 and 17. And whenever you get a new level, you can change one of your Meta Magics. All around very useful. Subclass is the... It progresses more like the original one. It's just you don't get it at level 1, which still sucks, but especially because they haven't really done enough, in my opinion, to do some stuff, but oh well. Sorcerer's Festivals is gone. I already mentioned that. Sorcerer's Restoration has moved to level 5. And it now is a scaling amount of sorcery points when you have none. So, yeah. It's better. I still think this could be better, but we'll see more about it. Sorcerer Incarnate moved to 2 levels earlier, and it's been changed from being just an extra spell, which is great. Arcane Apotheosis is at level 20, and it also enhances innate sorcery, so we have 2 upgrades to this feature. So, as a bonus action, you can unleash your magic for 1 minute. Save DC of spells increases by 1, and advantage on spell attacks. And you only have 2 uses of the feature per long rest. It's not even like Barbarian Rage, where you have like more later on, but it's not bad. It's certainly better than what we had before, where it was like, oh yeah, you know, or at least what Sorcery Incarnate was doing, where it's like, oh yeah, you just buff your spell attack rolls, which you don't really make a lot of, especially later on, and it doesn't really interact with save DCs, so it's like, yeah, that's odd. I do wish it was by 2 rather than 1, just because it's kind of a disproportionate increase to spell attacks, but I digress. Overall, I think this is good, but I would like if Sorcerous Burst was an innate cantrip. So basically they've backpedaled on pretty much all examples of you just get this spell, which I will say, I understand people hating the incarnations in the previous ones, where it was like, at this level, all you get is a new spell. And there were some pretty bad ones, like Paladin in Playtest 6, where it's like, oh yeah, you get 6 smite spells known for free. That was disgusting. Where it's like, no. I'm just gonna call that out, no. So I am actually, and it's like, you know, personally, I'm fine with a leveled spell being given innately. However, it's more of a case-by-case thing where, like, Divine Smite, it made sense because it was a class feature, but is getting changed to be a spell due to mostly how easy it is. Hunter's Mark, because it should have been an innate feature anyway, but it's a spell, so once again, those 2, it's kind of a weird case where they're very unique cases where, due to the original circumstances, they didn't work. Like, they weren't what they should have been. So while there's some oddities to how it works out, those 2, I'm fine with them getting extra spells. And with cantrips, I am also fine, because cantrips, at least, they actually are always usable, so it's actually nice to have a always usable cantrip, such as Sorcerous Burst, where it's like, yeah, you always have Sorcerous Burst. It's a useful cantrip to have, especially since it's actually been buffed, which is pretty nice. But yeah, you don't get that as an extra cantrip now, and so it's adding the Eldritch Blast problem to Sorcerer. And it also, as we'll see later, removed a really cool feature you got is Dragon Sorcerer. So yeah, ultimately I think this is one of the most negative changes, where I wish you could just have Sorcerer's Burst. Again, because cantrips, it's fine. In fact, 2 classes have actually needed that since the start of the game, with Warlock like being pretty bad and then Bard being even worse. Which, for reference, Bard's main problem is that Vicious Mockery is really your only option, thus you are basically forced to take it. Warlock at least had the illusion of choice, and the caveat that as a Hexblade, Pact of the Blade, you can actually skip over it because you don't really get the full benefit of Eldritch Blast, mostly because you don't have the invocation slots to make it decent, like to really go into it like the other two. But yeah, it's, it is what it is. So yeah, here it's like I'd rather not have to worry about this. The spell list change, it's fine. Like, there's maybe some extra spells that could be brought in here and there, but and this is going to be especially true for the Druid, where Druids had probably the worst designed spell list in the game, where there just aren't a lot of exciting spells. So Druid probably needs a spell list rework, but that's something that needed to kind of happen anyway, where they either need a bunch of new spells added to their list, or just a bunch of new spells to fill out their arsenal. But Sorcerer stuff, I mean, it's largely unchanged. Font of Magic, it's just, you can expend a spell slot with no action now. Otherwise the same as Playtest 5. Which I think it's honestly fine like that. Meta Magic, still at 2nd level. I think you only get 2, but I'm going to double check. Do all my stuff. Don't worry about some of the stuff shown. That's for later stuff. Playtest 5. Oh. I should have opened this earlier, but oh well. The things you forget to do sometimes. Yeah, I get that. So, thus far, though, I do think that, and I will actually say, I think Sorcerer is technically better here. It's just, okay, yeah, you got 3 meta magic options, but I think you only got 2. Yeah, you got an additional magic at 13th. So now the idea is that you get 2 more at 10th and then 17th. So you still get 6 total, but now it's moved across more levels, and it's basically smoothed out a bit more. You got your Sorcerer subclasses. Also, who the crazes is responsible for choosing subclasses? Because this is egregious. They brought back Aberrant Sorcery and Clockwork Sorcery to Tasha's subclasses, and they're not getting changes. They didn't even try. Like, seriously, you could put so much more effort into this. It's baffling, especially since Clockwork actually needs some modifications. It's mostly replacing Alarm with Shield of Faith, in my opinion, because that's really all they need. And it's like, yeah, it's an actually cool like, it would do a lot to make it better for its niche, where it's like, you don't care about Alarm, but the number one spell you want, you can't actually get. Because Shield of Faith is not on the wizard spell list, and thus you can't grab it, even though it's Abjuration, which you want. But I digress. So yeah, the Sorcerer subclass, still not a fan of its level move. And as we'll see, I'm not entirely a fan of what they're doing with Draconic still. Mostly because it still needs some work. And I actually think Draconic kind of regressed, which will actually tie back into Sorceress Burst being removed as a default spell. Sorceress Restoration, it's whenever you finish whenever you roll initiative or finish a short rest with no sorcery points remaining, you gain 1/5 your level sorcery points. So you do end up with the max 4 at 20th level. I would actually prefer if they made this divided by 4 instead. If only because it means that you can get the 4 points earlier, and then also have the 5 points in the end, where it's like, yeah, you're 20th level, you get 5 sorcery points back if you have none. If you have none is slightly annoying, but I do kind of understand why they might want this to stay around. But I do think making it divided by 4 would be much better overall, because it would help the progression a bit. Because I think they originally got... Yeah, you originally got it at 15th level, so if it was 1/4, you would get the 4 at 16th, which would be 1 later, rather than getting it, like, heck, 5 later, where it was originally 4, but you can't get the 4 until 20th. You get the 3 at 15th, so I think it would be better if it was 1/4. So it's like, yeah, at 16th, so, you know, at 5th level, you get only 1 back, but then at 8th, you get 2, 12th, you get 3, 16th, you get the 4, and then at 20th, all the way at the end, you get the 5 sorcery points back, which I think would be epic at times. Sorcery Incarnate. While innate sorcery is active, you can use 2 meta magic options on each spell you cast. And if you have no innate sorcery uses, you can use 2 sorcery points to reactivate it. Yeah, I think these are both fine. It would be nice if you had more sorcery points rather than still just having a number equal to your level. If only because it's like, yeah, that gets pretty tight with everything. But yeah, it is what it is. And then at 20th, we have Arcane Apotheosis. You can, while innate sorcery is active, you can use a meta magic without spending sorcery points. So yeah, that's one that can really get crazy. It's not the most amazing thing. I would like if it did something else. Like, heck, hear me out, but you automatically upcast all your spells while in innate sorcery. So it's like it's cast as if it was 1 level higher. So it's like if you... And that even means that a cantrip will act as if there was a 4th upgrade, where it's like, oh yeah, you do even more. Like, you add a 5th dice to them. And then, like, a 1st level spell is a 2nd level spell now, or 2nd is 3rd. 3rd is 4th. 4th is 5th. 5th is 6th, etc., etc. So it's like, yeah, you upcast everything in it. Which I think could be fun, where it's like, oh yeah, you're going crazy now. But the meta magic updates. So Distant Spell is now doubling the range. Yeah, that one previously did some stupid things where basically that sort of those range upgrades would absolutely break the hell out of some spells where it's like, wait a second, you just added double the range. Like, you do more than double the range. It's ridiculous. Like, especially because it still affects spells like Thunderclap and such. Though with this version, at least, it's like, yeah, it's doubled to 10 feet, which is fine. It's not ridiculously busted like the previous one, where it's like, oh yeah, suddenly you use Distant Spell, you hit the entire battlefield. And then Seeking Spell is 1 point rather than 2. So it's just 1 point reroll. Heightened is still 2 points, but Subtle Spell does not remove costed material components. Yeah, that one where it was like, oh yeah, you can bypass costed components, which I think was their intent originally, but it's like, yeah, no, you actually do still have to have a costed component. If something is consumed, it might... So this kind of ends up being kind of a side grade, where it's like, sometimes you might have a component that's not costed, but consumed. But, oh well, it's semantics. But this version, yeah, it's much more balanced. Being able to bypass costed components is absurd. So, yeah. Even though some are kind of BS, but that's a whole other topic. Twin Spell! Oh, Lord. Lord, oh, Lord. So, I get that people did not like the old Twinned Spell. But I do understand why they're like, well, actually, we're not going back, because there's a reason we changed it. And it's because it was doing something you're not supposed to be able to do, where it was basically a better quickened spell. And while the previous one, I get that people didn't fully like it, where it's like, oh, you are just recasting the spell you cast last turn. It's nowhere near as exciting and such, but this is... Ugh. So they decided, okay, well, we'll bring it back where it's like, oh yeah, it'll... Like, you use it and it splits the spell, you get to make the attack against more targets, but now it only works with spells that can be cast with a higher at higher levels to target additional creatures, and it increases the spell's effective level by 1. So yeah, that's pretty bad. Where it's just like, oh yeah, I use this spell that a lot of which aren't normally taken as main sorcerer spells, especially by several of the subclasses here, because I think only like some of them you might actually want to use it, but I think only Aberrant Mind is going to use these a lot. So it's like, yeah, no, this is straight up worse. Like, infinitely worse than what we had. It's like, yeah, no, this one doesn't work for me, where it's like, yeah, no. I would rather have the previous version where it was like, yeah, it's basically an entirely different thing, but the reason it's an entirely different thing is because the previous thing was way too powerful for what it was doing. So, on to subclasses. Draconic Sorcery. So, there is a positive change. I will say that. Dragon Speech gives you Draconic now. So, rather than the previous version where it was like, you can always understand and be understood by dragons, but you didn't know Draconic directly. Which, honestly, it's kind of weird. It's like, wait, why can't I know Draconic anymore? It's like, I should know Draconic, but I don't get to. And as much as I hate proficiencies at, like, beyond first level, this one, it's like, yeah, it should have straight up Draconic. Like, that's what this wants to be, but it wasn't for some reason. And yeah, this, welcome back Dragon Speech, like, welcome back Draconic. Dragon Resilience, unchanged. And this does mean my main problem with the previous incarnation, like, my big problem was that they just don't have anything that cool. Like, they literally have what they had at first level, but now you gotta wait even longer. It's like, now you gotta wait if your DM isn't playing at starting at third level, which in One D&D, yeah, no, I will, like, 99% of the time suggest just start at third level. Even if you have to modify all your encounters in a module, start at third level. Do not start at first or second. But yeah, I do think this needs some reworking, and I will talk more about what exactly I would like reworked as we go forward. But level 6, Elemental Affinity, it's still pretty much the same. Dragon Wings, it's back at 14th level. I think it was... No, it was at level 14. But it's now just, hey, you have a fly speed again. And it's pretty much just like, oh, hey, you have a lot of stuff going on that's like, you know, you just fly all the time. I did like the idea behind the previous version, though, where it was tied to your Sorcery Incarnate, where it actually modified the spell, and then it also had a second effect that was actually pretty cool, where it's like, at the end of your turn, you flap your wings and damage creatures around you, which was a really cool addition that I'm sad to see gone. Especially because it helped them be more of the melee sorcerers they're supposed to be. And I'll say overall, this is a regression. Like, the previous version was a mess, but it wasn't a bad mess. Don't get me wrong. This, it's like we've reverted back. It's, ugh. And I will say, honestly, I get why some people were like, aw, but I liked having constant flight. But honestly, to me, I'm actually okay with Dragon losing it. If only because I feel like Storm having flight all the time, it would be nice if they were the only subclass that got it. It's like, no, Storm gets to do that all the time. They have the constant flight. Dragon doesn't get that, and it's like no one else gets that, or at least gets as good of one. Which they could always do, but yeah. And it's like Elemental Affinity, it's Elemental Affinity. I still wish they moved the resistance to be at first level. Possibly as part of Dragon Speech, with it being like Draconic Ancestry again. And it's like, okay, you choose a dragon type. You know, you speak, read, write Draconic. You're always understood by dragons. And then also you have, you choose your damage type, and you have resistance to it. I think that would be a nice addition, and then have level 6 get an additional thing going on. As they've actually removed the coolest idea in Draconic Exhalation. Like, this was such a cool idea. I loved it. So it's like my main problem with it was, A, it's at 10th level, which I wish it was earlier. And as I would say, the resistance would allow you, being at first level, would allow for some room to say, okay, we're going to give you another feature. And then also that it was ranged attacks still, rather than being melee attacks through this. Especially because it's like, it's a cone, which you want to be up close to do. But ranged attacks have a penalty while you're next to someone, so it's actually, you kind of get punished for using it where you're supposed to use it. So I will say, bring back Draconic Exhalation as a 6th level feature. So it's like you have Elemental Affinity and Draconic Exhalation, and make Exhalation a cone or line, and then have it be tied to your Dragon Ancestor, which would be a first level choice as part of Dragon Speech, that also gives you the resistance. And then it's like, okay, you might have a cone or a line, and basically bring back the idea that there is the cone or the line for all dragon stuff. Please. And also keep it associated to what the actual dragon does. Please. Enough of this Dragonborn not matching the breath weapon shapes. Like, you had that right the first time. And Draconic Exhalation was really cool. It's like, yeah, take this cantrip, which we know you have, by the way, and modify it. That was such a cool design. And it's also part of why I want Sorcerous Burst back as just, oh yeah, you know Sorcerous Burst by default. Heck, you can even tack it on to innate sorcery or spellcasting, where it's like, yeah, like, you have 5 cantrips. One is Sorcerous Burst, but who cares? I would love to see that return. Like, Chaos Bolt I could care less about, mostly because I would only want it on Wild Magic. But that's just how it is. Draconic Presence. Yeah. I don't care that this is back. At all. Like, I never liked this, honestly. It's, like, you know, as a bonus action, spend 5 sorcery points to make a 60-foot aura. And for a minute, creatures in the aura have to succeed on a wisdom save, or be charmed or frightened. I honestly do not care about this. I would like a different capstone, please. Maybe even a dragon form that just, you know, you're a dragon sorcerer. Why not embrace your ancestry, just become a giant dragon suddenly? And then also have that upgrade Draconic Exhalation to do even more damage and be an even bigger AoE, where it's like, you know, instead of just a 15-foot cone or 30-foot line, it's like, oh no, it's a 30-foot cone or 60-foot line now. And it does, like, an extra d8 damage. Because, real quickly, because I forgot to mention this earlier, it's actually scrolled down this. Yeah. They changed the organization on this. They basically inverted it. So, yeah. Sorcerer's Burst. The only change is it's a D8. That's it. It does D8 damage now. Which is actually good, because I felt like the D6s were maybe a bit low, where it was really bad if you didn't get a 6 and roll an extra dice. So, while it might be very powerful when it goes well, I do think it's ultimately not too bad, because it's kind of offset by, you have a 1 in 8 chance of hitting it, because it's also less consistent now, but it's like, a 1 in 8 chance to get extra dice is a fair trade for when you don't get extra dice, it's not as bad. So it's like, I think it's overall better this way. But Draconic Presence, yeah, I don't care about it. Wild Magic Sorcery. So this one, oh boy, it has a lot of fun. So, Wild Magic Surge. No longer needs DM permission. That's good. Tides of Chaos. Guaranteed way to trigger wild magic. Bend Luck. Now only 1 sorcery point instead of 2. Wild Bombardment. Now lets you use a wild magic surge effect that casts a spell or replenishes expended sorcery points. So yeah, this one is a major upgrade. So once per turn, roll a d20. After casting it, using a spell slot, roll 20. Wild Magic Surge. Tides of Chaos. Gain advantage on a d20 test once per long rest. And after you cast a sorcerer spell, the spell slot, before regaining the feature, you can just Wild Magic Surge and regain the feature, which can do some pretty absurd things, but yeah. It's certainly a fun way to test your luck. Bend Luck, meanwhile. Use a reaction, spend a sorcery point, and add a d4 bonus or penalty, your choice to the roll. Controlled Chaos. When you roll on the Wild Magic table, roll twice, use either number. Simple enough. Wild Bombardment. Though I will actually mention, it would be nice if you rolled the same number. It let you choose whatever. Because I think that would be a good addition as well, where it's like, oh yeah, you rolled the same number. Where it's like some 1 in 1,000 chance or something. Something around that. Not exactly, but in the ballpark of 1 in 1,000. Or I think 1 in 10,000, actually. But it's much crazier math than that. But it's just yeah, you won the lottery. Okay, choose what the crazy you want to do. In Wild Bombardment, after you have Sorcerer spell, you just do a Wild Magic Surge that casts a spell or restores sorcery points. And can't do this again for 1d4 long rests. I kind of wish it was just a long rest, but because I don't think this is exciting enough to warrant the 1d4 long rests. But I mean, then again, it does actually cast it an extra spell, so I guess kind of is, but I mean, it's level 18 as well, so I think ultimately having it just until you finish a long rest would be fine. But, yeah. So, Warlock, we're going to be skipping over. Though I will also quickly mention, just as a wish list, Wizards, please swap Aberrant with Storm Sorcerer. Just please. Please rework that subclass. And especially because they went back. They really went backwards with Draconic Sorcery, where, yeah, we're going back to the kind of derpy version where we have two subclasses whose first level features don't match where they go later on. Because, like, Draconic Resilience fits better with going up close and personal, but Storm Sorcery has the up close and personal abilities later on, whereas Storm Sorcery, its first level ability helps with mobility, which would be better for a mobile skirmisher that isn't in direct combat. But the abilities that would help a ranged damage dealer more are on Draconic Sorcery. So I do think having a modification to where it's like, okay, Dragon Sorcery gets Draconic Exhalation back, and then also has a new level 18 feature, perhaps a dragon form or something, or basically anything that actually meshes into the rest of the subclass. And so it's like, okay, maybe even bring back the wing flap thing and have dragon wings tied to innate sorcery, which, I mean, by that point, you can use sorcery points to reactivate innate sorcery anyway. So I don't think it's that bad. The only other thing I would say is extend the duration of innate sorcery to be like 10 minutes instead. I think it'd be fine. But Storm Sorcery, I would like Storm Sorcerer to be a ranged skirmisher rather than a melee derp skirmisher, where it's like, oh yeah, you basically have to take the Eldritch Adept feat to get Armor of Shadows because you need the AC, since it's really good on you and terrible on Warlock, but that's besides the point. And then also, I would like to see probably, honestly, it could be either Shadow or Divine Soul. It's just either one would be fine to have some reworking. Clockwork could stay, though, on the condition they actually update their spell list to be to get some actually decent spells, like specifically replacing Alarm for Shield of Faith. As I mentioned before, even if Shield of Faith isn't the best fit thematically, mechanically it's something that's desperately needed, where, you know, it's a directly defensive spell you can cast on an ally to keep them safe. Like, they're supposed to be a support build, but they kind of suck at being a good support build. I don't mind the idea of a support build without healing, but I would like if it could actually do its job and not kind of feel like you're just not really contributing to too much of interest most of the time. And it feels like other options are just better at what you want to do. But Wizard. So the Wizard has seen a few changes and modifications. Mostly some, like, subtle tweaks, but the most notable being that all their extra spells, just like Sorcerer, have been removed. And this time, it's not as bad, where it was like, scribe spell, memorize spell, modify spell, and create spell were kind of weird, where they all manipulate spells and stuff as spells. So you're basically using one spell to mess with another. And it just ended up being a very weird one where it's like, okay, that one... Meh. And as I said before, I actually still think they could use an extra cantrip. And have their, like, the mage mechanic being that they all have a special cantrip. Such as, like, you know, like, maybe bring Arcane Burst back or something. Like, you know, maybe... And maybe even have it be a spell like you prepare, and then a cantrip that like does preparation stuff where you choose its damage type and like maybe even saving throw during your daily preparations. So at the start of the day, you choose what saving throw it targets, what damage type it deals, and then also what or maybe it's like, you know, you choose 2 damage types, you get to from among all the energy options, unlike the curated list that Sorcerer's Burst has. And you get to choose any 2 energy damage types, and it does damage of that type, and it's a 5-foot sphere that you create. Where it's like an explosion of magic in a 5-foot radius sphere from a point in range. And you deal like maybe preliminary dice would be D4s, but D6 could also be fine. Though it would just be better Acid Splash. Or rather, Baldur's Gate 3 Acid Splash, which is actually good in that. But anyway, otherwise though, the main modifications to Wizard, it's like spellcasting. They by default get spellbooks as a spellcasting focus. The Wizard spellbook is just part... Wait. No, it's... Wizard spellbook is absorbed into spellcasting. Spellcasting also sees the return of the cantrip formulas. By letting you retrain... basically prepare new cantrips during a long rest. Which... it's fine. The spell list change also has virtually no effect on Wizard because, let's be honest, the Arcane list was just the Wizard spell list. So, that doesn't really matter, so, yeah. That's fine. So, pretty much, like, largely not too much of a difference. Wizard Spellbook, also, like, Scribe Spells is gone, of course. Wizard, Arcane Recovery is back at first level, because it was at second level, mostly because they brought Wizard Spellbook as a separate feature, but that's been rolled back, which, yeah, I'm fine with. Scholar is the replacement to Academic, and it offers an expertise now. Because I think Academic was just you got... Oh. Oh, yeah, you have advantage on study checks. Which can be very powerful. It's like, oh, suddenly you're just winning more. In Scholar, it's just like you get expertise in Arcana, History, Nature, Religion. Perfect. Though I will... Oh, yeah, you do have proficiency. So, yeah, it's a good one. I wouldn't mind if it was Arcana, like, if it was just Arcana. But, like, having the option, it's like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, you're probably almost always going to take Arcana because it's the sensible choice. But the option is cool. Though it might also be interesting if it was Arcana +1. Because normally classes don't usually go for these expertises. So giving Wizard 2 would be fine, where it's like, yeah, you have expertise in 2 knowledge skills. But if you only have one... but if you don't have proficiency in skill, you gain the proficiency instead. Would also be nice. Just to tweak this up a little bit. But what we have is cool. It's definitely nice and useful. Memorize spell. It's just a feature now. It's not a spell. Modify spell and create spell are gone. They were kind of weird ones. Especially where it was basically just permanent meta magic, which is wacky. Spell mastery is back to level 18 and has actually had a major change where it has to be an action now. But you always have them prepared and can change one with a long rest, which is nice. With basically what they said, yeah, no. The intention was always it's a standard action spell, but they didn't deny the use of shield, which ended up being a very good one up until Strixhaven and the hilariously overpowered Silvery Barbs came out, in which case that became the best one. But yeah, and signature spells is now 20th level again. So yeah, this is... Overall, I do think Wizard has changed further to be even better than it was. So memorize spell, it's like, oh yeah, you know, you can spend a minute, choose a spell first level or higher, don't have prepared, and you prepare it instead of a different spell. Yeah, it's simple, and it works. So, yeah, ultimately I think that it's pretty good overall here. Everything's been tuned up, and it works. I just think that they could use a special cantrip that is like, this is the wizard cantrip. Just like, more as a way to offset the idea that Sorcerer and Warlock have their own signature cantrip. As well as Bard, but they're a weird case where, and I think we can all agree, especially now that they're going back to their old spell list, them having default Vicious Mockery would be so good. Like, my gosh. It has been a problem since day 1 of 5th edition. Please give Vicious Mockery for free. Free Bard spells and cantrips known. Please. Because they are worse than Warlock. I will say that. So, the subclasses. As you'd expect, it's just 4 subclasses that are returning. So it's Abjuration, Divination, Evocation, and Illusion are the 4 shown here. It would have been nice to get Transmutation updated, but these are all good and they do work better, especially since there's a change to a spell that makes it a bit, requires Abjuration to have a change. But speaking of Abjuration, you get the Savant, which, yeah, you get 2 free Abjuration spells known. So, yeah. And that's just around the... Oh, yeah, and there was the discount, so... basically, it gets around the discount, which I don't... Oh, yeah, the discount actually is removed as well in this playtest, which... I mean... Yeah. And it just gives you more spells to your spellbook. Which, yeah, it's fine as that. Uh, Arcane Ward. So you can also uh, add spells or HP to your Arcane Ward by just expending a spell slot as a bonus action without needing a spell cast. So you don't have to cast an abjuration spell to add HP to it, but Arcane Ward also specifies that you do use a spell slot, which unfortunately kills the very fun combo with Armor of Shadows, where now granted you could also do this with Spell Mastery much later, but having Armor of Shadows anyway was actually really good, especially going like starting out. It's an amazing buff. So sadly, you can't do that anymore, which is actually a cool and fun option. It's still any abjuration spell though, but yeah. So it's still twice this level of the spell slot. I wouldn't mind if they upgraded that though, where it's like it's 2 plus. It's like maybe it's 1 plus the spell level or 2 plus. Just because having it be equal to twice the level, it's like, yeah, I just think like it just doesn't have enough HP. Where I think this is actually, in my opinion, kind of a net negative where you just don't have much HP in that thing. So maybe if it was, they made it where it was 1 or 2 plus twice the level, or maybe int plus twice the level. So it's like at first level you only need to cast 1, or like, so like at third level you'd have a max equal to 6 plus. You'd have like 9 HP maximum. So like a first level spell would do like 5 HP to it, which would be nice. Where it's like, yeah, you can actually absorb some good damage and just make it better. Where it's like it's more efficient and doesn't feel like it's now very fragile without that. Without access to what you could do before. Though I will say, I do think that ultimately it wasn't bad what you had before, where it was like, yeah, out of combat, you can just top up your Arcane Ward and be much more aggressive with your shield, which I think was actually really cool. So I think ultimately, I feel like they've kind of gone a bit too far with this one, where the only like where I just feel like pulling back on needing on being able to use Armor of Shadows and stuff. I mean, because I do kind of get that, like, well, the intention was always that you were using a spell slot spell, but there was a few ways of getting it where you're not doing that. So I think it would have been nice to keep that around where it's like, well, especially if it's either you have the increased HP per spell slot. So it was like there's a flat bonus to it where it's like 1 or 2, maybe even plus int to the HP whenever you cast an abjuration spell. But it's one of those things that I do like the idea that you can use a bonus action to just give it HP now. Though I do wish it also said you can create it with this. action. So, like, as a bonus action, you can create it. Though probably you are going to cast Mage Armor starting out, but yeah, it's... Looking at it, I feel like the tweaks are kind of a mixed bag, where the build you used to have, like, stuff you would do with it was cool and all, but I feel like this needs more work, where either they need to bring back the idea that, no, it's just where it does work with spell mastery and other similar effects like Armor of Shadows, and maybe even bring in a default Armor of Shadows where you get at-will mage armor. Because the main benefit of it was you can top up your armor, your ward, outside of combat, so you can basically build into being a close range wizard, which is a kind of fun build to make. Projected ward, it's the same. Spell resistance is also the same. Spellbreaker is replacing improved abjuration. So it only affects dispel magic. But you always have it prepared. It should also say, if you don't already have it, it's added to your spell book. But basically, it's like you always have it prepared anyway, so it would just be nice if it was like, oh yeah, it's in your spell book, by the way, for free. And you can cast it as a bonus action now, which is awesome. And you add proficiency, your prof bonus, to the ability check. So, yeah, this one's good. Losing Counterspell may seem odd, but Counterspell has been changed. So, oh my gosh, I just realized I also didn't mention what happened to Arcane Eruption, but so Arcane Eruption for Sorcerer, going back to that because I kind of missed that. I think basically the only change was it's a dex save now instead of a con save. I still think it needs another d6 to the damage, just so it's not 3 behind Fireball. But that's it. I also like how they have the like wizard tag, even though it's like, but I guess like, yeah, you see what spell this is on through this. And jump has also been modified. But yeah, and counterspell. So what happened to counterspell? Because it's kind of relevant here. And I'll just mention jump now. Basically, jump is now a creature can spend 10 feet of movement to jump 30 feet automatically. Which is honestly absurd because it's basically better Longstrider. So I do think that might need to change because you're just getting a better Longstrider. So yeah. If it was one jump, it would be fine, but yeah. But Counterspell, basically, its main change, this is another example of something that it's getting nerfed because what it was doing before was way too good. So, Counterspell is just, that creature makes a con save. If it fails, spell dissipates with no effect. The action used to cast it is wasted, but it doesn't expend the spell slot. So, so I have two nitpicks. One, while I do like the idea that it's the same save as a concentration check, I do think it would make more thematic sense and fit better with the idea that it's harder to counter someone's spell if you're like a higher level caster. So I think it would be more appropriate if counterspell required a saving throw using their spellcasting stat instead, it might be a little more complex, but I think it would be better where, even though, yeah, like, Constitution is for concentration checks, it's kind of like a concentration check. I think it would be more appropriate to say, oh no, it's your spellcasting ability modifier, where a powerful caster with high intelligence, like a high-level wizard with high intelligence, can bypass the counterspell easier than a novice wizard with lower intelligence. And that's just a, like, personal preference thing, kind of, and more of a thematic thing. But also, let me just point out that this does mean Counterspell basically got nerfed into the ground. Bad. Because it doesn't get rid of the spell slot, which means they can just do the exact same thing the next turn. So I do think there needs to be an additional thing of they can't cast the spell, or like you can't recast that spell at that level on your next turn. So basically it's just like until the end of their next turn they can't do the same thing, where it's like, you know, you countered their big fireball, you liked it, so it kind of feels like you're just wasting it. You're just delaying their action, which it's not bad. It's just, it would be nice if it was like, no, you don't get to cast that spell again immediately. You don't get to do that. But that's just like, that one's a bit more important, where I'd say, like, I'm fine with it staying a Constitution save, though I think spell mod would be cooler. But Counterspell needs to prevent them from recasting the spell immediately. Like, I get not wanting to waste the spell slot entirely. That's fine. I just think it should also not let them recast it that fast. Anyway, back to Wizard. Before we got sidetracked. And I apologize for that. It's just it. So there's only 2 changes here. Divination Savant. It's the Savant change as expected. In Third Eye, it's a bonus action instead of an action, and it allows you to cast See Invisibility instead of seeing invisible stuff or seeing the ethereal plane. And Incapacitated doesn't shut the feature off. Everything else, it is what it is. Or at least it is what it was before, so yeah. Honestly, in looking at it now, Greater Comprehension should be Comprehend Languages for free. Or Tongues, but I think Comprehend Languages itself would be cooler, so it's like, yeah, like, just reading it, it's cool and all, but having a full Comprehend Languages, I think, would be cooler. Especially because it's, like, kind of the weakest option now. But everything else, yeah, it is what it was. So Evocation, it has a Savant change. And there's a subtle yet unique change. Potent Cantrip and Sculpt spells swapped places. So you now start with Potent Cantrip. And then Sculpt spells is now over at 6th level. So the main reason for this change, as they said, you don't really have too much to go with on Sculpt spells until later. Or at least, it doesn't really start becoming a very powerful and useful thing until you start hitting 5th level and on, where it's like, yeah, Fireball and Sculpt spells, you don't beat that. It's absolutely incredible. But it's just one of those things where, yeah, like, sure, you had Shatter and Burning Hands and Thunderwave, but you don't really use as many, and you also use more single target spells, and in particular, more cantrips early on. So their idea is that, you know, at 3rd level, you get the cantrip buff, which might end up being a bit too powerful with that half damage on miss. It you know, it is what it is. But it's definitely nice to have, yeah, the cantrip buff is when it matters most. Though I do think Empowered Evocation would be better to start out with instead, and have Potent Cantrip moved back, or at least the half damage part. And then Empowered Evocation, which does actually buff cantrips as well, brought into 3rd level. So I think those two could also swap places, where it's like Potent Cantrip is at 10th level, where I think, yeah, it's actually really good at that level. But I think it could also, though this should be a general change more probably, but also have it do whenever you miss with a spell attack roll in general, you do half damage. So specifically, it also affects your like Chromatic Orb and stuff, where it's like, oh, you missed with Chromatic Orb? Okay, you do half damage. Though I think that should be added in general, where if it's a level of spell of 1st level or higher, you deal half damage on a miss. Like, if you're going to expend a spell slot and you miss, like, to not have those be all or nothing. But with what we have here, this is a good change where it's subtle. No one would have asked for it before, but it's a good upgrade. Like, this is great. Illusionist. Savant change, of course. Improved Minor Illusion, still improved Minor Illusion. Though it has been tweaked, I think, to be... It actually is more intuitive, where it gives you a different cantrip if you already had it, which is great. Malleable Illusions, bonus action rather than action. Thank you. Nobody likes wasting their action to use that, so this is good. Illusory Self can be reused with 2nd level spell slots or higher. Illusory Reality can no longer deal damage or give any conditions. So that's like how it's supposed to work. So more of just a clarification on that one. But hey, it's still pretty cool and interesting. And that's pretty much it for the casters besides Warlock, which, spoiler alert, there's a lot to talk about with Warlock alone. Like, I had plenty to talk about here, but that one, I questioned some of the changes. But we'll get into that next time. And without further ado, I'll see y'all next time. Halo Zoo, out.